Okay. Hi. Can you hear me? So, good morning again. A few moments ago, I was just kind of testing international waters. I'm happy to report that this works better than hi. And so, kind of happy to see that this is becoming more universal than our normal way of greeting, or the normal way I was used to greeting people. Um, This morning you heard the chant, the Heart Sutra, the brothers and sisters, the English chant that the brothers and sisters were chanting up here. It's called the Heart Sutra. Te has another name for it, the insight that brings us to the other shore. And my first introduction to Buddhism was through the Heart Sutra. I heard it a lot growing up in a traditional Buddhist family, but I actually didn't understand any of it. It was chanted quite a lot and really fast, but I had none of the words registered because it was in a language I couldn't understand. It was in Sino-Vietnamese. Actually, it wasn't Sino-Vietnamese. It was kind of like a phonetic of the Pali. Some Pali phonetic, some Sino-Vietnamese. I have no idea. But it wasn't in a language that I could understand. And I remember it wasn't until I was in my late 20s and I was visiting a friend's house. And he had that book on his coffee table, and I was flipping through it. And I thought, oh, this, somehow my instinct told me that it was kind of familiar, but I couldn't recognize where I had seen it before, because the words in the book were very understandable. uh, and it was Tay's book called The Heart of Understanding. And where I recognized it was, in the end where you get to the mantra and it says "Gate Gate Para Gate." I'm like, this must be the same. But yet I understand the words now, and it was quite amazing to me. And so it was the very first time that I was introduced to the concepts of emptiness. Although it was the first time that I felt the concept of emptiness was explained to me, because I've heard it many times growing up, and there was a kind of a mystery around this word, and I didn't really get it. And the people who used it seemed to have like a kind of like an authoritative knowledge over it, and I felt like I was on the outside of that. I couldn't really understand it when anybody was saying emptiness or using that word. And so when I read the book, it was the first time emptiness was explained to me. And it was the very first time, I remember in the opening chapter, that it was very beautiful to me, because I also really love literature. And the opening chapter, it was an invitation to just look deeply into a piece of paper, and to see that the piece of paper is made of non-paper elements. It's made of the sun, the rain, the stars, the forest, the people cutting down the paper, the parents of the people cutting down the paper, and the paper factory, the workers at the paper factory, et cetera, the supermarket, how it got, and then because I was reading it and I'm holding a book, and so I'm holding this piece of paper, and for the first time in my life, I thought, wow, there's more to this piece of paper than I ever thought possible. And at the time, I was already at university, so I was quite. It was quite shocking to me that I didn't know that much, you know. Um, and as I read on in the book, it was more and more of the same of teachings like that. The teaching on interbeing, that everything has to interbe with everything else in order to be. Like the flower is made of only non-flower elements, made of sunshine, rain, earth. The whole cosmos is in the flower, just as the whole cosmos is in the piece of paper. So reading the book, we were invited to contemplate things like that. And I remember for the first time in my life, as soon as I finished reading the book and I put it down and I was looking around, it's as if I was seeing things differently for the first time. I have a 12-month-old nephew, and right now he's beginning to walk around and saying, "What's this? What's this? What's this?" So we have to tell him the names. Oh, this is the table. This is your eyes. This is your nose. This is your head. This is your shoulders. And I felt when I finished reading the book, it was very much the same feeling. I was looking around, just I wasn't asking the question, "What's this? What's this?" But it was kind of like the same thing. It was a new process of recognition where I had to call things by their names again, just like I did when I was a child. But now I'm not saying, oh, this is a table, and I say, oh, table, but table made of non-table elements, or my mother, and mother is made of non-mother elements, or my father. So I was. It was the first time I was learning to look at things in a new way, with the light of interbeing. And so I developed this love for the Heart Sutra. I felt it was a very simple and very compact sutra, and it introduced so many of the ideas in Buddhism that made it so accessible for me. Ideas I didn't really understand too well before, like emptiness or interbeing or impermanence or non-self. And I always, so for many years, I had this really great love for the Heart Sutra, until a few years ago, when my father fell ill. And I remember I was preparing to go home to be with him for a while. And as a going away present, the sisters, they offered the chanting, the Heart Sutra, to me. Because at the time, Tay had just retranslated the Heart Sutra into the insight that brings us to the other shore. And I felt the translation was really, really beautiful. And the new chant that Brother Plum made to it in English was also very beautiful. And at the time, our Sangha in Blue Cliff, we were trying to learn the new chanting. And the sisters knew how much I loved the chant, so they were singing this chant. They were offering this chant to me as a going away present. And as they were chanting it, for the first time, I just felt so sad hearing it. Especially, the lines, this body is itself emptiness. This body itself is emptiness, and emptiness itself is this body. And somehow when I thought of my father, there was a terrible sadness that came up in me when I heard the chanting. And so they offered it to me, and I listened, and of course I cried, and then I went home to be with my father. And somehow there was a part of me that was very resistant, became very resistant to the chanting, to the Heart Sutra, and also to the ideas of no self and impermanence and interbeing. I became so very, very resistant to those teachings, and I didn't know why. And especially when my father passed away, there was a part of me that really didn't understand. There was a part of me that, because at that time, my father passed away about 2 years ago, 2 years and something months ago. And, a part of me accepts that life is impermanent. A part of me knows that life is impermanent, that, we are made of non-us elements. And of course my father, is also of the nature of no birth and no death. And he will, just like the piece of paper, he can never be destroyed. He was never born, and he could never be destroyed. Parts of him has already gone into the cosmos, into the earth, into myself, and into everyone around me. But still there was this terrible sadness in me, and I couldn't reconcile the two things. I couldn't reconcile the because I'd never encountered anything that contradicted impermanence, that contradicted no self, or that contradicted interbeing, those concepts. And so I couldn't reconcile what I knew to be the truth with what I was feeling. And because I was feeling this terrible sadness when he passed, and a part of me felt the teachings on impermanence or non-self or, interbeing. I've been exposed to these teachings for like a decade. And there was a question in me, why aren't they helping? Why am I still so terribly sad? And I'll just take a moment to talk about my father. Before I came into the practice, and I guess when I was younger, I didn't really have a very good relationship with him. And he was not home very often, and he had this, other life, I guess. He was into, many of the vices that you could think of, sex, drugs, alcohol, etc., gambling. And so I didn't really see him much growing up. I didn't really have a lot of one-on-one interactions with him growing up. And at one point, where our communication was almost non-existent. And then until I came into the practice, and with the help of Te, the teachings, and the Sangha, slowly I was able to open up communication again with my father. Slowly I was, and through time, I was able to communicate more and more with him and understand my father more and more. And up until the time he passed away, I was able to, our communication had developed so much that I was able to share with him, what was deepest in my heart, my concerns as a nun, my aspirations, etc. So we went from this place of very difficult father and daughter relationship to a very beautiful one at his passing. And I remember the last few days of his life. It was quite beautiful, because I remember so many people came to visit him, and each person that came to visit him, I saw he was able to offer them something. And I remember one of my aunts who came. Nobody that I knew of thought she was a very good mother. But when she came and she visited my father, he said, he was trying to water everyone's seeds. Everyone who came to see him, he offered them something. And so to her, he said, you're a very good mother. And I was so surprised that he would say that. But the moment he said that, I saw her bloom. She smiled really big, and I recognized that maybe no one else had said that to her before, and it was something that she needed to hear, and he knew that somehow. So it was many, many incidents like that where people came to visit him during the last few days of his life, and he just was able to offer something for them. And his last, the last three things that he said to his children and his family were, as I love you. I'll always be there for you, and thank you for loving me. And that last one really stayed with me. Just everyone who came to visit him, he said, thank you for loving me. So when he passed away, I was having this terrible time. I felt so sad that I had to let my father go, especially when I had developed such a good relationship with him. And I was beginning to recognize so many wonderful qualities that he had. And I was very resistant to let go of this person. And I couldn't understand, a part of me was very resistant. I just didn't really accept impermanence, and I didn't want to accept no self, and I didn't really want to accept interbeing. Although I know that, they're the nature of things. So I was having this internal struggle, and I wasn't able to reconcile what I was feeling and what I understood to be the truth. And it went on like this for a few months until one day I was able to call my suffering by its name. So I want to take a moment to write some things on the board. Manas. I think on Thursday, well, I heard that there was a video Dharma talk by Tay, and he spoke about store and consciousness and mind consciousness. So I'm going to go off on a tangent, and I hope you can follow me. In Buddhist psychology, there's this idea of there's this kind of like model of how mind works, and you have store consciousness, which contains all the seeds. And you have mind consciousness, which has its base in what we call manas. And manas is also a part of store consciousness. Let me draw everything, and then I will explain it. So there's a model in Buddhist psychology about mind, and then there's 8 consciousnesses. We say we can identify 8 kinds of consciousnesses, and these are only 3. This is called the store is the 8th consciousness. Manas is the 7th consciousness, and mind consciousness is the 6th consciousness. And then you have the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body consciousness, which are touch. So you have the eye for an eye consciousness, and you have the ear and the ear consciousness, and you have the nose and the nose consciousness or olfactory consciousness, and and mouth or tongue, taste consciousness, I guess. And then you have the body, which is the touch consciousness. And so just as the eye is the base for eye consciousness, manas is the base for mind consciousness. Okay? Like the ear is the base for the ear consciousness, the nose is the base for nose consciousness, body is the base for touch consciousness. So manas is the base for mind consciousness. So in this model of consciousness of mind, of Buddhist psychology, in the stored consciousness there are all kinds of seeds, right? Every kind of potential, you can say, you can find in stored consciousness. You can find the seed of anger, the seed of jealousy, the seed of joy or compassion, or so in some schools of Buddhism, they can identify 51 kinds of mental formations or seeds. Including fear, jealousy, anger, joy, compassion, etc. So you can say everything. Stored consciousness contains everything, all of the potentials. In manas, only actually appropriates a part of stored consciousness and considers it as a self. So manas, I'll write down the different functions of characteristics of manas. You can say, first of all, it's considered as the survival instinct. It's called the survival instinct, or you can say vitality. And it has a function of preserving what it considers as the self. I had some notes. It has a function of clinging to life, protecting life, and defending itself from dangers. So you can say it's the survival instinct, the will to survive, the will to live. And the second function of manas is appropriating the self. Which means it considers it will pick out just some of these seeds and say, this is me. It appropriates the 5 skandhas or the five aggregates and considers it as the self. So that's the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations and consciousness. And only a select part of it considers as the self. So, these seeds are considered kind of like images, and you can see them. I guess you can understand them also as kind of like pictures of the mind. So in here you have, body, feelings, perceptions, etc. as well. And it'll select, a certain number and consider it as the self. That's why when you hear something like, that's not the way I am, you know that manas is functioning, because there's a certain way that, there are a certain number of seeds that it has selected and considered it to be yourself. For instance, when, every one of us has the seed of anger, whether big or small, for instance, and then you go, I'm not an angry person. You've already appropriated, some seeds that don't really include anger as the idea of yourself, right? Or, I'll never do that. I'll never betray, blah, blah, blah. But actually you have the seed of betrayal in you as well. But at the time that you're saying it, you're appropriating other seeds, like loyalty. You consider yourself a loyal person when you utter that. And so you've appropriated, that part of store, which includes everything, all the potentials, but you've only considered a small part of it to be you. Does this make sense? Okay. And in our daily life, you can hear how we appropriate ourselves. I'm not that kind of person. Oh yeah, she's that kind of person. Or that's not who I am. Oh, or this is who I am. Or, basically the idea of I am. And that's the function of, one of the functions of manas is to appropriate a certain number of seeds and to call it I am, a me. And the third function of manas is that is pleasure seeking. The third characteristic. It's always seeking pleasant feelings. And it does make sense, right? Because if it has to do with the survival instinct, of course you want pleasant things. You want optimal conditions in order to survive. And pleasure seeking here, it's not just pleasant feelings, maybe coming from food or sex or drugs or alcohol or, even relaxation. It also includes, for me, I discover one of the ways that I do seek pleasure is in my attachment to happy endings, and that's a kind of pleasure seeking as well. And I wish a part of me wishes that I know this kind of practice when I was younger, because I was extremely attached to happy endings. Especially when you read a book or when you watch a movie or something like that, and the outcome is totally not what you want, you kind of suffer a little bit, and that's because, you have this tendency to seek for pleasure, and the outcome is not pleasurable. And especially in this day and age, the information age, you have so much information. Every day you're reading so many stories, or on the news you hear so many things, and some of it may touch a very deep kind of devastation in you. And it's good if you could recognize, that is touching. It's actually touching off manas, For instance, if you read a book and the heroine or the hero dies, there's a kind of devastation that happens inside of you because you wanted the hero to have a happy ending. You wanted the heroine to have a happy ending. That's a kind of pleasure seeking too. And it touches a kind of suffering in you if the outcome is not how you want it. And another characteristic of manas is so it ignores the danger of pleasure seeking. And this kind of happens a lot right now. Or it could happen. It's happening quite a lot in our society. You see it with the internet, or you see it with our way of consuming things. Consuming, some of us, maybe we are caught in gaming on the internet, and we don't have a, you continue to seek it without knowing how damaging it is to your body or your mind. It could be with alcohol, it could be with drugs. But manas, one of its role is to ignore the danger of pleasure seeking. And you may know that what you are consuming is harmful to you, but you kind of override that knowledge. And that's what manas does. It overrides the knowledge that something is harmful for you. And another characteristic of manas is it tends to avoid suffering and hardships. Very understandable. we live in a society that kind of looks for instant gratification, and if there are things that cause, if there are things that make us put a little bit more effort in, we kind of avoid that road. We want to be instantly gratified. We have the tendency to avoid suffering and hardship. That's the role of manas. For instance, if you had the thought, I just want to win a lottery ticket, maybe a few $1 million lottery ticket. I don't know how much is sufficient now to make you have an easy life. Maybe a few 100 million. When I was in my 20s, it could be just $1 million. The idea of having $1 million was, it would give you an easy life. Maybe right now it's 100 million. So if you have the thought, I just want to win $100 million so I don't have to ever work again. That's manas speaking, and that's a part of you wanting to avoid suffering and hardship. Or in the case of some of my sisters, I just want to know how to speak English already, so I never have to go to another English class. That's also manas speaking. You want to avoid the suffering and the hardship. And you can recognize this tendency in many things in your daily life. And the sixth characteristic of manas is it does not see the goodness of suffering. It does not recognize the goodness of suffering. For instance, we know that, if we have ever been hungry, then you know how fulfilling it is to have something to eat, how pleasurable, how wonderful it is to have something to eat. But that's thanks to having experienced hunger. Or if you've been through a tough relationship once, or it could be an abusive relationship, or it could be a relationship where you've suffered a lot, you don't feel good about yourself at all. And when you get out of that relationship, you have more experience in what can bring about well-being for you, and maybe what can bring about well-being for the other person. So maybe in your next relationship, you have more experience in taking care of yourself and taking care of the other person. And that's a kind of goodness that, all of the angst and the sorrow that you felt in the relationship, it's fodder for understanding yourself and understanding the other person. So in Plum Village, we have this saying, suffering and happiness inter-are. You cannot have the lotus without the mud. The no lotus, no mud. So suffering can help you to understand happiness, and it can also be the background for happiness, and it has its value. But manas doesn't recognize that. It just wants to avoid suffering. And the seventh characteristic of manas is that it ignores the law of moderation. Manas doesn't know how to say no. Let's say if you had a kind of ice cream that you like very much and you already feel full, manas cannot say no to the next spoonful of ice cream that you like very much. It ignores the law of moderation. Sometimes you feel. It's something else that will tell you. It's mind consciousness that will tell you, oh, I've had enough already. I'm full. We don't have to have another bite of this ice cream. So what does this have to do with my grieving process with my father? Like I said, I didn't really understand the sadness that was coming up in me and where it was coming from, and my resistance to letting him go. And then one day, but I kept breathing through the sadness every time it comes up. I kept sitting through the sadness. Every time I did sitting meditation or whatever, a bit of sadness will come up, and I just allowed myself to sit through it. And I allowed myself to breathe through it. And then one day, for some odd reason, I just said, hello, manas. When the sadness came up and I was having a terrible time letting go of my father, I recognized that, yes, this is a part of me that doesn't want to let go, that wants to avoid the suffering, because a part of manas too is very afraid of impermanence. It's afraid of non-self, because it thinks that impermanence will cause suffering. It thinks maybe non-self will cause suffering. And I just wanted my father to be with me forever. That's a kind of pleasure seeking as well. It was my attachment to the happy ending. And so one day it just occurred to me, this may be manas operating. And so I just, every time sadness came up in me when I thought about my father, I just said, okay, hello, manas. We do have a practice with this model. You have the seeds right here, right? And every time something happens, or you hear something, or you can think something, or etc., it could touch off a seed in here. Let's say the seed of sadness is touched off, right? Or let's say the seed of anger is touched off. That's what we use often. And so it manifests in your mind consciousness as anger, and you can recognize it as anger. And the more you allow this anger to stay in your mind consciousness, the bigger it becomes, the stronger it becomes down here. So our practice is to recognize it, embrace it when it comes up, and we allow it to go down to the base. We can, and there are many ways to do that. We can breathe with it. We can take it for a walk. We can change the peg. Basically, find something else to do, for instance, so that your mind is not entirely focused on the anger. We have another mental formation called mindfulness. And if anger comes up, and you also invoke mindfulness to come up, it can embrace the anger and hold the anger. When anger comes up, you just say, I'm angry and I know I'm angry. So that's a kind of a container that you provide for it in order for the anger not to get bigger, and in order for it not to get stronger in your stored consciousness. Because the stronger the seed is here, like if the seed of anger is very big down in your stored consciousness, then it takes very little for it to manifest, right? Maybe somebody just says something very tiny, or a very tiny incident happens and you explode. You explode very easily. So the bigger your seed of anger is at the base, the easier you explode. And so every day, if you allow yourself to get angry every day, and you follow, and there's no container for it, there's no practice with it, you cannot breathe through it, you cannot recognize it. If you're angry, you just allow yourself to be angry. You're rehearsing the anger, you're strengthening the seed at the base. In neuroscience nowadays, they say, you are strengthening that neural pathway. You're developing that neural pathway. And so it takes very little. Eventually it becomes so big that it takes very little for it to be triggered. And compare it with someone whose seed of anger is very small. Let's say a situation happens, something happens, and this person will likely explode, Whereas the other person, that incident, it was nothing to them. But it's the same incident, you see. The same thing that happened in one person, it could cause an explosion. And another person, nothing. Because that person hasn't spent time nursing his anger every single day. Or allowing anger to continue to manifest every single day. And this is the same with sadness, for instance. So the period of sadness I went through after my father passed, every day that it came up, and I kept telling myself, I don't understand where this is coming from. I wasn't exactly embracing it. I was kind of nursing it in a way. I was embracing it very little, I did try to breathe through it, but there was a part of me that said, I don't understand, And every day that it came up, it was never, too big that it kind of paralyzed me. But I knew that I was watering my seeds of sadness every time the sadness came up. Even though a part of me, I felt, it's normal. It's normal to be sad if my father passes, and I needed to acknowledge this. And in a way, I felt that if I didn't feel the sadness, I was kind of, a part of my resistance to the practice was that, I felt if I didn't feel the sadness, I was forgetting my father. So I was kind of resistant to practicing and to getting and to kind of embracing the sadness in me. But until the one day when I, when the sadness came up, and I said, I recognized the part of me that was seeking for forever. I recognized the part of me that wanted permanence, that wanted, him to be there for a very long time, that ignored the goodness of suffering, because I knew, without death, life cannot be possible. And you see this all around, but a part of me couldn't accept it, because that was Manas speaking. So one day when that sadness came up, and I was able to say, hello Manas, when it came up. And it was different this time. I didn't say hello sadness, because normally when I said hello sadness, another thing that came up was, I don't understand this. I don't understand why I'm sad when I know life is impermanent, when I know and so it started a practice. I had never said hello to Manas before that day. And it started a practice, and I've been practicing it for, I guess, over a year now, over almost 2 years now. Every day, I kind of try to recognize when Manas comes up. And it not only helped me with my sadness and seeing the sources of where my sadness came from, but it also helped me with many other things. For instance, this idea of appropriating the self. I discovered it's not just with my body, my feelings, my perceptions, but it was also the space around me. For instance, if I was sitting on an airplane and someone put their arm on my armrest, that armrest in a way belonged to me, because I got so irritated and so uncomfortable when that person put their arm on what I considered my armrest. And when I started the practice, then I was able to say, when that feeling of irritation came up, I was able to say, hello, Manas. And, I took care of it right away. I'm not too bothered if the person is putting their arm on my armrest anymore, because I realized what an illusion it is to think that that armrest belonged to me. And you can see this with your house, with your car, with your cat, with your partner, for instance. We have so many things that we've appropriated to ourself, actually. And when those things are touched, our boundaries are touched. What we consider ourself is touched, and we kind of, if they're touched, we kind of feel a bit violated, right? So many things happen throughout the day that, I recognize manas coming up and manas in action, let's say. Let's say I have this place where I put my toothbrush. I just put it in a jar and whatever. And one day another sister put her cup in front of the place where I put my jar with my toothbrush. And as soon as I saw it, I'm like, that's my space. And as soon as I had that thought, I said, okay, well, hello, manas. And it really helped me to transform and to see more the interbeing, or I guess to be in touch with the interbeing. And it just doesn't have to be with space. For instance, somebody can say something that, even sometimes they're, oh, you're such a happy nun, for instance. Or why do you get angry all the time? And then I'm like, well, that's not me. And as soon as I have that thought, I say, hello, manas. And it opens up a space for me to accept, to receive what is being said, and to kind of accept what is being said. Because in truth, in our stored consciousness, we contain everything, right? We contain all the seeds. Anger is one of them, happiness is one of them, joy is one of them. So it also helped me not to be too attached when somebody says, oh, you're this kind of person, and like, no, I'm not. Or you have this reaction to it. I say hello, manas, when I have a reaction to something. When somebody says something like that to me. So I just call it by its name. So manas, the way I'm presenting it here, it looks like I'm presenting it as something that is kind of negative and something that we have to contain, or that we have to try to transform or control. But in fact, it's a very necessary part of us. The survival instinct is very necessary. Even the need to appropriate a self is very necessary. And it has, it has to do with surviving as well. Because and you can see this on the cellular level. If you do not have let's say an amoeba, well, let's just say your cell, right? You have the cell, you have the nucleus, you have the cell membrane. And in order for this cell to be functional, it has to be able to regulate and to establish a kind of homeostasis with its internal and external environment. So it kind of has to have a boundary. And for me, I feel the appropriating the self is a kind of like this superficial boundary of the self. And it helps you to kind of establish a homeostasis with your environment. So in a way, this function is also necessary for our survival. Pleasure seeking is too. Let's say if you're hungry and you don't know how to seek for food, or you're thirsty and you have no desire to go and look for water, then you cannot be. Yeah? You die off eventually. So in a way, pleasure seeking is also necessary. Ignoring the danger of pleasure seeking. I feel, as I understand it, I feel just like in any biological system, where you have an accelerator and an inhibitor, or an accelerator and a braking system, you can consider manas as the accelerator, right? And mind consciousness can sometimes be the inhibitor, I guess. But actually, mind consciousness, how it operates with manas, sometimes it can go along with manas. Sometimes it sometimes it can go along with manas, or sometimes it can inhibit manas. Sometimes it can allow manas to go on, and sometimes it can inhibit manas. And so, let's say if you are looking for food and you're hungry, you're looking for food, you're eating, and manas would tell you to continue to eat. Go ahead, you just continue to eat, and that's very necessary, actually, for our survival. This kind of prompting to eat. And then mind consciousness, at one point, when it feels your body is full, mind consciousness has the capacity to recognize what is going on. Mind consciousness can kind of like survey the situation and say, okay, your body is full. You can stop eating now. So that's the role of mind consciousness. So in our practice, anyhow, if you look deeply into each one of the characteristics of manas, we see that, it's also a necessary part of life. It's a necessary part of life. And mind consciousness, the role of mind consciousness is to kind of like moderate manas so that it doesn't become destructive for us. It's kind of like cancer cells, It's lost its, cells, if they've lost the ability to go through apoptosis, then they continue to kind of proliferate and proliferate and proliferate. But if they maintain, if they still have that capacity to go through cell death, then they divide and they die. They divide, they die. So there's a balance in your body, in the number of cells in your body. But if it's lost that kind of capacity to stop, if it's lost, if it doesn't receive that signal of apoptosis, it continues to divide. So manas will continue to do what it has to do in order to survive, and mind consciousness plays the role of kind of moderating manas. So in our daily practice, in our daily practice, we cultivate mindfulness, concentration, and insight in order to help kind of like moderate manas and keep a kind of homeostasis, kind of balance. And I want to draw another picture, another model of manas that Tay has drawn. So this is kind of like a lotus. I hope you recognize it as a lotus. Here you can consider the mud, manas, as kind of like the roots here, the mud. And here you can kind of see mind consciousness as the stem. And here is the wisdom of non-discrimination. So, a part of the survival instinct in manas is to preserve the self, is to protect the self, or what is appropriate as the self. And the role of mind consciousness is to kind of help manas to see that one, it's not to say that manas is wrong, but to say that look, you're also connected to everything else, right? This body that you think is yours is also made of non-body elements. Is also inter is with everything else in the cosmos. These feelings that you think are yours is also made of non-feeling elements. These perceptions, mental formations, etc. It's not contained. It's not just this, but it is with everything else too. It's connected with everything else as well. And that is the wisdom of non-discrimination. Mm-hmm. I'm going to sit down for a little bit. So in the second picture, you can see a different model. As mind consciousness is a continuation of manas. Because it is the, as I said earlier, the eyes are the base of eye consciousness. So manas is the base of mind consciousness. Yeah. And the wisdom of non-discrimination is a continuation of mind consciousness. And you see that, in Plum we say, no mud, no lotus. if we don't, if there's a lotus, then you know that there's mud. Without mud, then there can be no lotus. So the wisdom of non-discrimination is thanks to the presence of manas, right? Thanks to the mud of manas that we have, the wisdom of non-discrimination. It's because we have this idea of self that we also have the idea of non-self. It's because we have the suffering that we have, the happiness. So the wisdom of non-discrimination is you cannot take it out of manas, just like you cannot take manas out of the wisdom of non-discrimination either. So manas is not something to get rid of. Manas is something that can help us to generate the wisdom of non-discrimination. So before I came back to Plum Village, I had a dream of my father. And in the dream, so we were somewhere, and I saw my father, and I came up to him and I said, I was so happy to see him in my dream, first of all. And because I was coming back to Plum Village, I said, Dad, there's so many wonderful people I want you to meet. Because it was my desire for a long time that, my father spend more time in Plum Village and meet many of my wonderful brothers and sisters, and also many of the friends who come here. And I felt this is a kind of environment that he would thrive in. And he's been a few times, but he didn't stay for as long as I liked him to stay. The couple of times that he came to the Sangha. But anyhow, in the dream, I said, Dad, there's so many people I want you to meet. So many wonderful people I want you to meet. And in the dream, my dad smiled and he said, don't worry, I am. There's so many people I want you to meet, Dad. Don't worry, I am. And when I woke up from that dream, I don't know if you recognize the mud and the lotus in the dream. Dad, there's so many wonderful people I want you to meet. I had this idea I was still attached, and I want him to meet all these people. And I thought he would never have a chance to meet all these wonderful people. And a part of me also understood that my father is meeting all of the wonderful people. Don't worry, I am. Because my father, I am a continuation of my father. So if I meet you, my father is also meeting you. So inside of me, inside of each one of us, I find there's the mud, and then there's also the lotus. There's an attachment to self. There's a need to cling to the self, but there's also the understanding that we inter-are. And those two things, through my process of grieving for my father, I discover they can be together and they can be in harmony. I didn't have to say, why is this there? Why do I have the feeling I cannot let go of my father? Why am I still craving for my father to be with me? Why do I have the ridiculous idea that I want my father to be with me forever? For instance, that desire can be there. But I also have a side of me that understands, that can be in touch with interbeing, that can be in touch with impermanence, and that can be in touch with non-self. And they can, it doesn't mean that, understanding impermanence or understanding interbeing, it doesn't mean that I don't have to get rid of my desire to be with my father, for instance, or to have my father there. And every day, I feel, since I've learned how to kind of recognize this, I have a bit more peace in myself, and that's opened up more room for me to remember my father and to honor my father, and to allow more of the, instead of being overwhelmed by the sadness, that the more I think about him, the more wonderful qualities, the more space I have for more of his wonderful qualities and memories to come up. And now I can do it without being so sad. Because when the sadness is there, I just say, hello, Manas, it's normal. I know you're there. So the mud, and the lotus, they inter-are. So many wonderful people I want you to meet. Don't worry, I am. Yeah. Anyhow, thank you very much for listening to me today, and I hope you followed all of my tangents. My father says hello.